Hello and welcome. This is Janilata Bhattrai from Singleworldnews. A logical fallacy is a flaw in reasoning. Logical fallacies are like tricks or illusions of thought, and they are often very sneakily used by the politicians and the media to fool people. Today, let's talk about the common logical fallacies that you should look out for in media and in the conversation. Let's explore together, shall we? Strawman. You misrepresented someone's argument to make it easier to attack. By exaggerating, misrepresenting, or just completely fabricating someone's argument, it's much easier to present your own position as being reasonable. But this kind of dishonesty serves to undermine honest, rational debate. For example, after Will said that we should put more money into health and education, Warren responded by saying that he was surprised that Will hates our country so much that he wants to leave it defenseless by cutting military spending. Slippery slope. You said that if we allow A to happen, then Z will eventually happen too. Therefore, A should not happen. The problem with this reasoning is that it avoids engaging with the issue at hand and instead shifts attention to extreme hypotheticals. Because no proof is presented to show that such extreme hypotheticals will in fact occur, this fallacy has the form of an appeal to emotion fallacy by leveraging fear. In effect, the argument at hand is unfairly tainted by unsubstantiated conjecture. For example, if our state legalizes cannabis, it will go on to legalize other drugs and we will see a huge increase in addiction problems. Special pleading. You moved the goalpost or made up an exemption when your claim was shown to be false. Humans are funny creatures and have a foolish aversion to being wrong. Rather than appreciate the benefits of being able to change one's mind through better understanding, many will invent ways to cling to old beliefs. One of the most common ways that people do this is to post-rationalize a reason that why they thought to be true must remain to be true. It's usually very easy to find a reason to believe something that suits us. And it requires integrity and genuine honesty with oneself to examine one's own beliefs and motivations without falling into the trap of justifying our existing ways of seeing ourselves and the world around us. For example, Edward Jones claimed to be psychic, but when his abilities were tested under proper scientific conditions, they magically disappeared. Edward explained this, saying that one had to have faith in his abilities for them to work. Appeal to authority. You said that because an authority thinks something, it must therefore be true. It's important to note that this fallacy should not be used to dismiss the claims of experts or scientific consensus. Appeals to authority are not valid arguments, but nor is it reasonable to disregard the claims of experts who have a demonstrated depth of knowledge, unless one has a similar level of understanding or to access to empirical evidence. However, it is entirely possible that the opinion of a person or institution of authority is wrong. Therefore, the authority that such a person or institution holds does not have any intrinsic bearing upon whether their claims are true or not. For example, not able to defend his position that evolution isn't true, Bob says that he knows a scientist who also questions evolution and presumably isn't a primate. Begging the question, you presented a circular argument in which the conclusion was included in the premise. This logically incoherent argument often rises in situations where people have an assumption that is very ingrained and therefore taken in their minds as a given. Circular reasoning is bad, mostly because it's not very good. For example, the word of Zorbo, the Great, is flawless and perfect. We know this because it says so in the great and infallible book of Zorbo's best and most truest things that are definitely true and should not ever be questioned. Appeal to emotion. You attempted to manipulate an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. Appeals to emotion include appeals to fear, envy, hatred, pity, pride, and more. It's important to note that sometimes a logically coherent argument may inspire emotion or have an emotional aspect, But the problem and fallacy occurs when emotion is used instead of a logical argument, or to obscure the fact that no compelling rational reason exists for one's position. Everyone, bar sociopaths, is affected by emotion, and so appeals to emotion are a very common and effective argument tactic. But they are ultimately flawed, dishonest, and tend to make one's opponents justifiably emotional. For example, Luke didn't want to eat his ship's brains with chopped liver and Brussels sprouts, but his father told him to think about the poor, starving children in a third world country who weren't fortunate enough to have any food at all. Next, bandwagon. You appeal to popularity or the fact that many people do something as an attempted form of validation. The flaw in this argument is that the popularity of an idea has absolutely no bearing on its validity. If it did, then the earth would have made itself flat for most of the history to accommodate this popular belief. For example, Shamus pointed a drunken finger at Sian and asked him to explain how so many people could believe in leprechauns if they are only a silly old superstition. Sian, however, had a few too many Guinness himself and fell off his chair. Next is adhominem. Well, you attacked your opponent's character or personal traits in an attempt to undermine their argument. Ad hominem attacks can take the form of overtly attacking somebody or more subtly casting doubt on their character or personal attributes as a way to discredit their argument. The result of an ad hom attack can be to undermine someone's case without actually having to engage with it. For example, after Sally presents an eloquent and compelling case for a more equitable taxation system, Sam asks the audience whether we should believe anything from a woman who isn't married, was once arrested, and smells of a bit weird. Next is composition or division. You assumed that one part of something has to be applied to all or other parts of it, or that the whole must be applied to its parts. Often when something is true for the part, it does all apply to the whole, or vice versa. But the crucial difference is whether there exists good evidence to show that this is the case. Because we observe consistencies in things, our thinking can become biased, so that we presume consistency to exist where it does not. For example, Daniel was a precocious child and had a liking for logic. He reasoned that atoms are invisible and that he was made of atoms and therefore invisible too. Unfortunately, despite his thinky skills, he lost the game of hide and go seek. Well, anecdotal. You used a personal experience or an isolated example instead of a sound argument or compelling evidence. It's often much easier for people to believe someone's testimony as opposed to understanding complex data and variation across a continuum. Quantitative scientific measures are almost always more accurate than personal perceptions and experiences. But our inclination is to believe that which is tangible to us and or the word of someone we trust over a more abstract statistical reality. For example, Jason said that was all cool and everything, but his grandfather smoked like 30 cigarettes a day and lived until 97. So don't believe everything you read about meta-analysis of methodologically sound studies showing proven like causal relationships. The fallacy. You presume that because a claim has been poorly argued or a fallacy has been made, that the claim itself must be wrong. It is entirely possible to make a claim that is false yet argue with logical coherency for that claim. Just as it is possible to make a claim that is true and justify it with various fallacies and poor arguments. For example, you say, recognizing that Amanda had committed a fallacy in arguing that we should eat healthy food because a nutritionist said it was popular. Alice said we should therefore eat bacon, double cheeseburgers every day. Next is loaded question. You asked a question that had a presumption built into it so that it couldn't be answered without appearing guilty. Loaded question fallacies are particularly effective at derailing rational debates because of their inflammatory nature. the recipient of the loaded question is compelled to defend themselves and may appear flustered or on the back foot. For example, Grace and Helen were both romantically interested in Brad. One day, with Brad sitting within earshot, Grace asked in an inquisitive tone whether Helen was still having problems with her drug habit. No true Scotsman. You made what could be called an appeal to purity as a way to dismiss relevant criticisms or flaws of your argument. In this form of faulty reasoning, one's belief is rendered unfalsifiable because no matter how compelling the evidence is, one simply shifts the goalpost so that it wouldn't apply to a supposedly true example. This kind of post-rationalization is a way of avoiding valid criticisms of one's argument. For example, Angus. Angus declares that Scotsmen do not put sugar on their porridge, to which Lachlan points out that he's a Scotsman and puts sugar on his porridge. Furious like a true Scot, Angus yells that no true Scotsman sugars his porridge. Next, appeal to nature. You argued that because something is natural, therefore it is valid, justified, inevitable, good or ideal. Many natural things are also considered good, and this can bias our thinking, but naturalness itself doesn't make something good or bad. For instance, murder could be seen as very natural, but that doesn't mean it's good or justifiable. For example, the medicine man rolled into town on his bandwagon offering various natural remedies, such as very special plain water. He said that it was only natural that people should be wary of artificial medicines such as antibiotics. Genetic. You judge something as either good or bad on the basis of where it comes from or from whom it came. This fallacy avoids the argument by shifting focus onto something's or someone's origins. It's similar to an ad hominem fallacy in that it leverages existing negative perceptions to make someone's argument look bad without actually presenting a case for why the argument itself lacks merit. For example, accused on the 6 o'clock news of corruption and taking bribes, the senator said that we should all be very wary of the things we hear in the media because we all know how very unreliable the media can be. Okay, next is middle ground. You claimed that a compromise or middle point between two extremes must be the truth. Much of the time, the truth does indeed lie between two extreme points, but this can bias our thinking. Sometimes a thing is simply untrue, and a compromise of it is also untrue. Halfway between truth and a lie is still a lie. Example, Holly said that vaccinations caused autism in children, but her scientifically well-read friend Caleb said that this claim had been debunked and proven false. Their friend Alice offered a compromise that vaccinations must cause some autism, just not all autism. The Texas sharpshooter. You cherry-picked a data cluster to suit your argument or found a pattern to fit a presumption. This false cause fallacy is coined after a marksman shooting randomly at barns and then painting bullseye targets around the spot where the most bullet holes appear, marking it as if he's a really good shot. Clusters naturally appear by chance but don't necessarily indicate that there is a causal relationship. For example, the makers of sugarette candy drinks points to research showing that of the 5 countries probably where sugarette drinks sell the most units, 3 of them are in the top 10 healthiest countries on earth. Therefore, sugarette drinks are healthy. Next is burden of proof. You said that the burden of proof lies not with the person making the claim, but with someone else to disprove. The burden of proof lies with someone who is making a claim and is not upon anyone else to disprove. The inability or disinclination to disprove a claim does not render that claim valid nor give it any credence whatsoever. However, it is important to note that we can never be certain of anything, and so we must assign value to any claim based on the available evidence. And to dismiss something on the basis that it hasn't been proven beyond all doubt is also fallacious reasoning. For example, Bertrand declares that a teapot is at this very moment in orbit around the sun between the Earth and Mars, and that because no one can prove him wrong, his claim is therefore a valid one. Next is false cause. You presumed that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is cause of the other. Many people confuse correlation, that is things happening together or in sequence, for causation. That is, one thing actually causes the other to happen. Sometimes correlation is coincidental, or it may be attributable to a common cause. For example, pointing to a fancy chart, Roger shows how temperatures have been rising over the past few centuries. While at the same time, the numbers of pirates have been increasing, thus pirates cool the world and global warming is a hoax. Next, ambiguity. You used a double meaning or ambiguity of language to mislead or misrepresent the truth. Politicians are often guilty of using ambiguity to mislead and will later point to how they were technically not outright lying if they come under scrutiny. The reason that it qualifies as a fallacy is that it is intrinsically misleading. For example, when the judge asked the defendant why he hadn't paid his parking fines, he said that he shouldn't have to pay them because the sign said fine for parking here. And so he naturally presumed that it would be fine to park there. Black or white. You presented two alternative states as the only possibilities when in fact more possibilities exist, also known as the false dilemma. This insidious tactic has the appearance of forming a logical argument, but under closer scrutiny, it becomes evident that there are more possibilities than the either or choice that is presented. Binary or black or white thinking doesn't allow for the many different variables, conditions, and context in which there would exist more than just the two possibilities put forth. It frames the argument misleadingly and obscures rational, honest debate. For example, Wales rallying support for his plan to fundamentally undermine citizens' rights. The supreme leader told the people that they were either on his side or they were on the side of the enemy. So guys, let's be aware. Let's get ourselves acquainted with the more fallacies like this. So just stay connected for more. Don't be fooled. Keep supporting us.